Welcome, everyone. Glad you made it here through this MIT labyrinth. We have 75 people online, at least right now, so a good audience for this esteemed panel. If you have questions in the audience, please don't be shy, raise your hand, but let me run the mic to you, okay, so we can have the virtual people understand. And if you're virtual, please add your questions to the Q&A section on Huba, and we'll get your input there as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Adrian to kick us off.
Hope you don't mind if I stand just to kind of get started. Hello, everybody. I'm going to stand right here in the middle. And so thank you, first of all, for attending, for kind of walking through the hot sun. I know when I got here, I needed about 30 minutes to dry up. I think you guys found it faster than I did. So appreciate you being here. First of all, before I jump into all the content, I want to thank our panelists, right? So thank you very much for joining us. Indeed, esteemed panelists is the right way to describe them. I will say Nachiket is missing from the board, so I want to introduce Nachiket as well. It's Dr. Sebastian Klapdor, where's Mark Clare, Dr. Sebastian Klapdor, and Nachiket. Nachiket is with us as well from Wayfair. And so we've got Wayfair, we've got Cigna, good representation, and we've also got Vista on board. So let's get started. A lot of you, I just kind of polled the room before we started. They didn't poll the 60 people online, but I hope the poll of the room kind of gives us an indication of kind of what everybody's looking for. Some of us are looking for just trying to fulfill a curiosity about data mesh, right? Trying to understand what it is. And then a lot of us are trying to figure out, really kind of gain some lessons learned. And so welcome. Thank you for making it here. And so what we want to do in this panel is try to address both needs, right? I want to help you guys understand, first and foremost, what a data mesh is. And I'll probably start with that content. I'll do it right now. I'll kind of give you just a quick, I call it my 3 steps of data mesh. And then we'll jump in, I'll walk over there, I'll sit down, and we'll jump into the content. When we do the panelist questions, we're going to cover 3 themes, right? The first theme is really going to focus on the journey, right? I want you guys to get a feel for the journey that our panelists have already taken on data mesh, right? Every journey is different, right? They've got a unique path, and so I want to make sure that we share that with you. Second theme, we're going to jump into strategy. And I think you'll find, and based on the pre-conversation we had, that strategy conversation is going to be leaned heavily towards business strategy. We're CDOs, we face the business. It's not about an IT strategy, it's about a business strategy. So I'm excited about that session. If we have time, we also want to kind of come back and, one, take questions, but also share some additional tips, what we've seen work, what we haven't seen work. Hope everybody's ready. All right, I'm going to give you my data mesh, my 3 steps of data mesh. Hopefully it resonates with everybody. First thing you need to understand with data mesh is it's an ecosystem, right? There's a lot that my company does, Starburst, for a data mesh, but we're part of an ecosystem. If you envision what a data mesh would look like in 10 years or in 5 years, and you look back across that architecture, hopefully you'll see a Starburst, and maybe you'll see a Snowflake, and maybe you'll see a Calibra or an Atlan, and maybe you'll see an Informatica or a Global ID. There's a number of tools that you will see in that architecture to come together to fulfill the objectives of that data mesh, right? And so it isn't any one product or any one tool. We're CDOs, we know we have to manage the entire architecture. Certainly data mesh is no different. When you start thinking about a mesh, there's 3 things you have to really understand. The first step for any data mesh is that connectivity. We talk about data fabric versus data mesh, and there was a question in the Q&A about what's the difference. I don't fall into the whole of trying to defend one or the other. I've seen both, I've used both, right? So I'm very familiar with them, and what I will tell you is in that first step of a data mesh is the same as the first step for a data fabric. It's about connecting decentralized data sources. We're in a room like this, every one of you represents a different data source. In a data mesh or a data fabric, it's about leaving the data where it is and connecting to it. How you do that might differ based on the technology you're using, but for the most part, as a principle, data mesh number 1 or data fabric number 1 is leaving the data where it is and connecting to it. Doesn't mean every data mesh looks that way. In some organizations, as you'll hear today, that your data is already in one spot. Doesn't mean you don't use a data mesh. You can still use a data mesh, but for a lot of us, myself included, in my past world, I had 36 lakes. That was a really big part and a really big challenge for me. So when you can solve that problem, that's a big win. A lot of companies celebrate that win, and they call that their mesh. Fantastic. What you'll find is once you start to get all this data, once you start to make that data available, it's overwhelming. And now you need to find a way to organize that data in logical domains for your consumers, right? So you start to say, okay, I've got all this data. I had a finance lead who was, Adrian, I can't find my data. Adrian, I can't access my data. In a domain for a finance team, you make all the data that they need available to them. So they don't care whether it came from SAP or Oracle or anywhere else. They go to their domain and they're able to see the data that they have access to. It's not that we've moved the data into some storage system and made it available to them. Rather, at least certainly with Starburst, we've given them the ability to use a federated query engine. Trino is our magic sauce, so to speak, to access those data sets. So now I've given you a domain with the data that you need, and you have access to it. That difference for most people is the difference between a fabric and a mesh, because in a mesh, you start focusing on the consumer, and in a mesh, you start creating these domains. Then you take the third logical step and the final step, and the jewel of any data mesh is a data product. Now I've got domains, and now I start to create data products within those domains that are reusable and that are shareable. And so the way you should think about this working, right? So if you sit back and say, okay, so what's really happening here? I have domain teams that are working autonomously. I have domain teams that are working in a self-service manner. They don't rely on central IT anymore. They're able to do more on their own, right? I always say, if you want to be data-driven, let the business drive, right? And so you're allowing these domain teams to drive. You're allowing these domain teams to be more autonomous in a self-service manner, and they're running, right? That's the vision you're trying to achieve. Data products help you achieve that because, one, they're reusable, but two, not that they're reusable because they're easy to use, right? A data product isn't just an aggregated data set. You would say, if everybody in the room represents a source, I'm going to take a table here, I'm going to take a row from him and a field from you, I'm going to pull it together and create an aggregated data product, and then I'm going to describe it, right? I know where the data came from, here's how you use it, here's who else is using it, here's the quality. You make it very usable for the consumer. That's the key, right? That's the, if the data product is a jewel, you want to make it valuable to the consumer. Now you can start thinking about monetization, all kinds of things, because now you've got a structure to manage a data product. But again, it's a reusable, shareable data product that's created within logical domains that are consumer-focused, that come out of decentralized data sources. Those are the basics for any data mesh. That's the foundation. There's a lot in the book, and I encourage you, if you want to read the book, it's quite long, but there's a lot in there. And I think for a lot of people, when we think about data mesh and we start thinking about it as a new concept, I think we might be missing the point. For a lot of us in the room that have been CDOs or in IT, I think a lot of us, you guys have gray hair like me, the principles or foundation of a data mesh, they've been around for a while. We've already been doing this, right? The domain-driven concept, we've been doing this. Federated governance, we've been trying to do it. Autonomous domain teams, whether you call them product teams or hybrid IT teams, I know in Amazon used to call them pizza box teams. We've been doing a lot of these fundamentals. What data mesh is trying to do, and I think what Zhamak has done in her book, is she's brought everything together into a consistent framework. Not that it's easy, but if we can start to tie all these things together, then we have a chance at trying to deliver and accelerate value for our business teams. So there's the foundation. Hope that was okay, guys. All right, now we can jump into the discussion. I'm going to sit down. That didn't take too long with that, did I? No, good. All right, so let's jump right into it. I want to start by sharing with you the individual journeys that we've had. And so we've got some pretty senior people from some pretty big companies, right? You don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from them, right? And so this is an open book, right? What I mean by that is no one's been prepped on what to say or how to say it, right? There's a lot of truth in the room, and so we're looking for that real discussion. And so we also would welcome any real questions. So why don't we start, let's start with Nachiket. If you can tell us kind of where you are with your journey, your data mesh journey, and how that's gone for you.
Sure, yeah, glad to be here. Hello everyone. I'm Nachiket Mehta. I'm a head of supply chain data engineering at Wayfair. So for those who don't know, Wayfair is one of the largest online retailer in the home space. We are recently coming up in the physical retail stores as well in the US. Overall, we have about 35 million customers, about 22 million products from about 16,000 plus suppliers. From the technology team perspective, and I thought it would be good to kind of give the layoff foundation and how our technology team is structured and where data sits in, that would make the data mesh kind of discussion easier. So from technology point of view, we are about 4,000 people in the technology group. And that's at high level, there's a customer-facing platforms, supplier-facing platforms, and supply chain or operations in the middle. And then there are infrastructure and sales and services and other domains. We don't have a central chief data office in place. Our data teams are federated within the engineering, within the technology group, along with the product design, data science, and the business that deliver the direct business values. On the supply chain side, my team has data platforms And there is inbound supply chain, which is everything before customer places an order. So think about everything from manufacturer, factories, over the ocean, dray, to our supplier warehouses or our warehouses, inventory and everything. And then outbound is everything after customer places an order to the transportation, our own warehouses, routing, last mile delivery, incidents, all that. Our primary stakeholders are chief operating officer, supply chain officer, and the board, who is trying to manage the cost-efficient, perfect order at scale, right?
Perfect order.
Yeah, so perfect order is like it has to be incident-free, no customer touches, customer ordered it, they forget about it, they get the perfect order, and there are a lot of KPIs built into it, right? So there's a lot of, if you look at from enterprise point of view, there are a lot of domains, right? You can count a customer domain, supplier domain, supply chain as a domain. But within supply chain, there are a lot more domains. Like we believe in build versus buy, so there are more, almost like 50 to 100 applications built to enable this. So there are a lot of subdomains, if we will, that enables.
Do they work autonomously already?
Yeah, so this whole, to get to your question, this journey started about a couple of years back when we did not use the data mesh as the word, but the journey was let's move from monolith to microservices and decouple at the technology level, right? And as part of technology, one of the first things that we did is let's federate the data teams with their respective technology counterparts. And data also has to be decoupled, decentralized along with the product, right? So that's where like domain-driven architecture kind of starts. We started with a lot of like executive buy-in. Our COO was a big sponsor of this end-to-end visibility initiative to get to that level. And then where we stand today is we have proved this as like smaller business wins along the way for certain domains. And I can talk about more exact business values that we have enabled. But the part is, if we think about like 3-stage approach, stage 1 is like early adopter, let's pick a domain, let's identify how can we enable this decoupled architecture using federated governance and the data platform. And second stage is let's expand, let's do it for more and more domains. And the third is we are stabilizing, we are sustaining this. So we are at the second stage right now, where the traction is there, the executive leadership support is there. We just have to get to the bottom level with atomic teams where they treat data as a product and kind of execute it for them.
I want to underscore, because I hear that a lot as a success story, the idea of starting with a domain, learning, and then building new domains, and then optimizing. That seems to be the way a lot of success stories kind of come together.
Yeah.
Perfect. Mark, Sebastian, what are you thinking? How has your approach gone?
Well,
You first.
you know, I've mentioned this before, and I'm lucky. I should say formally of Cigna. I recently left there, but earlier in my career, I was first firm-wide CDO, JP Chase, and then I went global to HSBC as their chief data officer of their retail and wealth global bank. And in each role, I've reported somewhere different. HSBC, I reported the CEO of the retail and wealth bank. At JP I reported to every CIO across all the businesses and the corporate CIO on top of that. So I had lots of bosses. And I've also reported to a COO. And part of what I've been brought in throughout my career, it's always to clean up a failed federated attempt. So what I'd like to have is lessons learned, why things have failed. I like to use the word distributed more than federated. Because I think there's a level of governance. I think of the hub and spoke model. What do you need in the hub? Is it standards? Is it policies that can be executed out in the spokes? And if you think of the spokes now as domains and delivering product, it's a balance of that hub and spoke. And the biggest challenge I've always had, and we talked about culture before, but I really want to jump into talent or people, is the biggest challenge I've had in my 25-year career is finding talent. And this year is probably the biggest challenge. I've gotten through my network, I've gotten so many phone calls this year to help former colleagues or former folks that work for me find engineers, find architects in different parts of the world. It really seems to be at an all-time premium. And yes, we have more data practitioners today than ever, but we have much greater demand. And the difference is our ecosystem. And I love the fact that you use that word, because our ecosystem 10 or 15 years ago was 1 or 2 data technologies. It was a couple data marts, maybe a warehouse, and it became a lake. It was fairly simple. Very, very little external data, depending on your industry, or no external data. It was all internalized. You could govern it. In the last 5 years, I've worked in banking, I've worked in biopharma, and I've worked in U.S. healthcare. I would say across those today, my ecosystems are more external data than internal data. A lot of that I have no control over at all, and the quality of it, the governance of it, but yet to drive actionable insights and enable businesses and business growth and business value, you've got to bring that together. So to take, I told my last boss at Cigna, I said, there's nothing wrong with a traditional architecture and traditional approach, but in a large, complex ecosystem, traditional takes a long time and a lot of money. And if we've learned one lesson throughout COVID, and I've talked to so many executives in COVID, is everyone's wanted immediate insights, immediate value. I watched in pharma where suddenly instead of tens of thousands of sales force going out to meet with providers, real-time digital events and having to do real-time digital analytics on who was joining the events and the messages they wanted to hear and getting feedback. So I think we've lived through the last several years where real-time has become a mandate. And so our traditional approaches of whether it was very, very centralized or lots of federated that weren't really connected and governed, you need that connection, you need the distributed connection. So getting that balance right is really, that's what we're doing. And that's, to me, what a mesh really is. It's about getting that balance, that hub and spoke balance correctly. And it's going to be different in every organization.
I want to highlight that hub and spoke. I like that idea, whether we call it federated or distributed. That's a really key piece as well. When we start thinking about federated governance, I know it's hard. What I mean by that is I appreciate that in a large data organization, you're trying to be data-driven, and you've got some teams that are dealing with low-risk data, and you have other teams that are dealing with high-risk data. You have some teams that are all about ideation and innovation, and you have some teams that are really working in stable environments. The point is, every domain is different. In a federated governance model, what you want to try to do is apply the right level of governance to make sure that team is successful. You want to tighten the screws too much or they're not going to deliver what they need. So at the same time, you need the hub. In the center, you've got to figure out those rules or those governance policies that are not negotiable. Or your auditors are going to come after you, depending on what industry you're on. And so that's a hard thing to do, is figuring out what I have to lock down and where I'm going to allow my domain teams, my domain owners, to manage their own levers, so to speak. Yeah.
And how to enforce it.
And that's
and a simple example we've all lived through in the last few years is, where's data privacy come in the last 5? I was living in London when GDPR came along, and the US 20 years ago with HIPAA, and HIPAA's evolved over time, is that if you live in the US or if you live globally, you're going to deal with a lot of regulations. The US, you're going to deal with it at the state level. If you're in a global role, you're going to have different security, different privacy, different compliance regulations in every country. So you want to democratize data, you want to have data everywhere, but you also want to protect it. I used to call it the 4 R's, the right data to the right people at the right time with the right level of protection or controls. Yeah. And I think you can only do that type of controls in more of a mesh architecture, because those controls are going to be different at each node.
There's no central IT team big enough to do it all.
Exactly.
Sebastian, they've covered a lot there. Let me give you an opportunity to see if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, super excited to be here, and happy to share a bit about our journey on the mesh. So I'm the Chief Data Officer at Vista. Many of you might know Vista, formerly called Vista Print. So we print a lot of kind of stuff for small businesses.
You did a lot of the MIT CDOIQ stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. So most of the merch is from us here. It's a 1.5 billion company, active in 15 countries. We have every year 17, 18 million customers ordering products with us. And our mission is to actually become the marketing and design partner for small business, because everything you need to produce physically starts with a design. So we want to help our customers actually already in the design phase with do-it-yourself designs, auto-generated designs, logo makers, but also things like higher value designs where you need a pro designer. So we bought a designer network and can link customers to designers to easily get the designs they need, and then sell them, put them on different products, be it physical products or digital products. Nowadays, social media, Instagram campaigns, things like that. So doing really helping small businesses not to worry about marketing and not to worry about design, but worry about their business and helping them to grow their business. So that's the Vista journey we are on. And obviously data is super important. So our CEO said, and the founder 3 years ago, hey, I need a chief data officer for that. So then here I am, he hired me. I was, before that, 12 years in consulting. I was a partner at McKinsey, doing a lot of digital and analytics work, also for Vista Print at that time. And then he said, hey, do you want to join the team and do the real thing, and not just consult people? I said, yes, I'm going to do that. And then I started building up the data and analytics team from scratch. And we from day one had a very, very, very impact-driven focus. How can we help enable Vista to drive more value from data? We were coming really from an angle looking at, hey, what are the different value pools we can enable through data? And where do they sit across the company? In manufacturing, in personalization, in dynamic pricing, in marketing optimization. So we do spend a lot of money on performance advertising. We were not really optimizing that spend. And then basically out of that, we started creating domains. And each of these domains was linked to value pools. Right? If you add these value pools up, and value pool means really that's the monetary value we can unlock through data and analytics in that domain. We added that up, and that was a massive value. And that helped us now to grow the data team from 70 people when I joined 3 years ago to now over 320 data practitioners building data products. And that was always the concept. We need to build data, see data as a concept from day one as a product. And that was the concept, the key element and the key mission to not treat data as a byproduct, but treat it as a product, treat it as an asset, and build reusable, scalable data products in these domains. And now we have over 120 data products across 5 domains. And then once we had figured out that strategy and how to build these products and that impact-driven focus, it became clear that we need to do it in a federated way. Because when I joined, we had a monolithic old on-prem BI data warehouse operated by a central BI team. They had no clue about any kind of domain knowledge about the data itself. But they were the ones that had to move the data to all of the consumers. So we had to break that up and using a federated approach for that. It's been pretty successful so far. But we also made some hard learnings. So I'm happy to share some bit more of that.
Your value pools, did you build domains based on those value pools?
More or less. So the domain modeling is always a little bit art and science. So we didn't want to have the domains totally imbalanced from a value pool perspective, but value pools were one criterion. So to say, hey, can we distribute the value a bit kind of equally among domains? But then also we used other criteria, like for example, our customer journey.
Right.
So we have now a domain for pricing, personalization. We do have one for marketing. Both of them with super high value pools. We have one for manufacturing. We do have actually 6,000 people in our plants producing products. So there's also big value pools behind that. Supply chain, manufacturing, forecasting, things like also even up to predictive maintenance of offset printing presses. How you can use data to determine when an offset printing press fails. So it's really broad.
I find it really interesting that both of you, sometimes when we start talking about data mesh with different customers, different organizations, you start to imagine 100 domains or a large number of domains, and it's overwhelming. How am I going to govern 5 domains, a number of data products? Started with 1 or 2 and then grew out. I think that's a good lesson, is that it's not about building, maybe who knows where you'll be in 5 years. But you're on that journey. You're starting slow. Fantastic. We could talk more about the journey. I think we will get into lessons learned. In some of your answers, I could already hear some reference to culture and reference to people. And so I want to tackle that piece a little bit more. And so, Mark, if your title says enablement, so we'll start with you. Mark, tell me about how hard it is, or maybe I'll take a positive approach. Tell me about how successful you've been changing the culture. How do you start with shifting that data culture?
And it's not easy. I mean, the first question I always ask, and in each role I've gone in, is how is the company governed?
Yeah.
From the board down. I went to one company that was incredibly committee-based for everything. And I got there and there was a data policy, and it was failing miserably. no one paid attention to policy, but if you built a committee structure, this was a global company, so I did it at the global level, at the regional level, and then into dozens and dozens of countries. So we mirrored the data strategy to the culture of the organization. And that culture was changing, so we went kind of up to date with what the organizational development consultants had recommended and how the company was changing more from a local country level govern to this global by function and by business, but with accountability in market. So that's part of what I do, is just, I don't try to create an artificial culture that doesn't fit the company. And so I try to use what's there. I think that's a big key lesson learned. And I don't say, I didn't always do it well, but it's something I learned along the way.
Let me say it again. I don't try to create an artificial culture. I try to work with what's there. Powerful, yeah. Nachikit, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I see. So data mesh is a socio-technical paradigm. It's not a technical platform that is out there in the market. You buy it and now you're successful. Culture and social element and organizational alignment and structure is very important, right? And for that, you have to start with aligning. Like, even though the theme is decentralized, but you have to align with the leadership, at least like on the best practices, and figure out how the training and the demos and the onboarding works. And then find your best allies, right, in the business or within the domain. Prove it, right? Like, just prove how it works, and like from top to bottom, from strategy and vision point of view, but the execution happens bottom up. That's the difference between data mesh and the data fabric. But so bottom up, like, you have to prove it, show it, do a lot of road shows, and then kind of get other buy-in from other individuals. Now, there is also a technical element involved in here, like how people treat data as a byproduct in most times. And so you have to identify who owns your data product, right? So is it a data product owner as a new role that you need, or is it part of your existing product manager's responsibility, where in addition to owning an application and the data as a byproduct, they have to now treat data as a product, and all the guarantees and the ownership and the metadata and the linking multiple data products across comes as part of it, right? So they have to kind of define that. And then from individual point of view, the training, the technology aspect, the APIs, the microservices. And it's not that you are like, you cannot have tables as a data product. You can. But identify how you'll discover them. Who is the owner? Where do you find that ownership? A lot of that education and learning kind of comes as part of that governance. Yeah. You have to change that culture bottom up, and then it's easy to federate and kind of decentralize.
You got to prove it. I love that, because I have a quote. I should have patented it because I'm going to give it away now. But maybe I stole it from somebody, so I don't remember. But I say, build a showcase, not a use case. Right, so that first domain or that first thing that you build, it's a showcase. You want other people to come and see it. You want to almost demystify data mesh or a domain. It's like, that's how it works. Wait a minute, you can pull a data product and you can just use it? Yeah. If the data product isn't quite what I need, I can just change it? Yeah. And so that's good that people start to realize this is different, this feels different. Proving it with a showcase, I think, is a great way to drive enablement. Sebastian, let's go. You close this one up.
Yeah, hey, I mean, culture, and it's always, in the end, it's about driving change through companies, right? How to treating data as an asset, right? And how to use that. And in my view, it always comes back to four things, and many of that was already said. It starts with role modeling and leadership, right? So if leaders don't treat data as an asset, if leaders don't ask data-driven questions, if leaders discuss in meetings without data, right? That's a bad culture. So it needs to start with the leaders role modeling that, right? And then I think the second piece is teaching, it's understanding, it's explaining people what the value is, but then making them understand the value, right? It's kind of, people need to understand what is the value in for me here by treating data like a value. You can just explain it. You should treat data like an asset. I need to explain the system. Look, there's self-service. You can go in there. You can go to the mesh, and at Vista now, literally everyone can go to the mesh. We do have policies around privacy, and we can talk more about governance, how we enforce things like that. But you can go to the mesh and pull the data literally in 1 minute. Yesterday we had an executive conversation around, hey, what are our customer care colleagues seeing? Have our inbound call volumes changed, and the reasons why customers call us? I literally went on my phone into the mesh and opened that data product, and I was able in that executive conversation as an executive myself able to add a data point and made that discussion way more data driven than in that instance. So it's showing the value, and we try to do that across the company. Then it's about training people to do that, because people must be able to do that, and that's coming to data literacy, all of that. And the last point, it's enforcing mechanism, and I think that's also very, very important part of driving a culture change is to put it into processes, systems, mechanisms. We, for example, put being data-driven, we defined that as one of our leadership principles. That's now part of every professional career conversation and every performance assessment as one criterion. How data-driven are you, and what are exhibits and examples where you've shown data-driven behavior? So that's the...
Data mesh isn't, you've heard if you build it, they will come. That's not the data mesh, right? Think about data mesh this way. If you empower them, they will build it, right? It's kind of a different way of thinking about it. If you empower your business teams, they will build, they will maintain, they will kind of drive their data products. One of the things that I was most excited about in the last 5 years, so to speak, in my career was I was a part of a do-it-yourself program at my previous company at Shell. And I got to be a part of this program where they trained 3,000 people. It's called Data Citizen, mostly business teams on the Power Platform, Power BI. And it was really interesting to kind of watch their learning curve. They picked it up quickly. They picked it up fast. And a lot of us, I didn't think that was going to happen. But what happened afterwards, once we empowered them and once they became powerful with the tools, the demand shot up the roof. Because now you've got a lot of people with doing their own analytics. I don't need an IT guy to do it anymore. I'm doing it myself. This is easier than Excel. I'm automating. Now they want more data. And so you kind of shoot yourself in the foot. You empower them, but if you're not ready to deliver the data after you empower them, you got to kind of do both at the same time. Fantastic. So you started to hit on the business side there, Sebastian. I'm going to come right back to you. When we start to think about data mesh, how do you tie that to your data strategy? And I know I'm going to feed you because you're going to correct me. It's not I already heard from the last time we talked, Adrian, it's not the data strategy, it's the business strategy. Talk to us about how you approach that.
Yeah, and it's even before that, it's also not the technology, right? It really starts with a business strategy, and then you work yourself down. That's how we did that. And again, we had a business strategy being the design marketing partner. How can we enable that through data? That informed how we built domains and added value pools to these domains. So adding that up, it's a multiple 100 million value pools that we are working against in these, or that each of these federated domains is working against and launching and building data products to unlock that. And what we are now trying is, through these data products and our data strategy, I would say that's basically the roadmaps, that's the aggregation of the individual domain roadmaps. What products they are building to enable that business value. That's the data strategy in the Vista context. Data strategy can mean a lot of different things. Yeah. On top of that domain roadmaps, there's also obviously a strategy to enable that through an infrastructure below that, a data platform, using a data mesh architecture basically. But that's our data strategy. And what we are trying to do is getting, I always call it the data flywheel spinning. Because that's what we try to do is we build a data product, and then that data product must show some value, and we are measuring that value. And this is the value. This basically then we measure how much money is it driving into the bank, how much incremental money is it unlocking every year by putting that new recommendation engine live on our website. Now, with that money that we are measuring and that financial contribution, we are taking some part of that and reinvesting it into building stronger foundations on data. So that's the mesh, that's also the talent, that's many different things, that's better governance, many tools also on our stack that help the data products teams actually in the end, and we now have 26 data product teams at Vista, to be more efficient and more effective. That means they can build the next version of the data products or the next data products in faster and with less effort, and that will unlock even more value. And that's kind of the data, and we can invest more into even stronger foundations, into even stronger platforms. And that's kind of the data flywheel that we are trying to get spinning at Vista.
I want to come back to investments in a second because there's something there that I think it deserves its own question. Before I do that, Nachikit, what's your view on data strategy and business strategy?
Yeah, so they go hand in hand, right? They are not different from each other. So at Wayfair, we have this STO culture, single-threaded ownership, where business, technology, product, design, everyone is aligned to serve and deliver a common business strategy. Right? So that technology is part of it. Like technology decisions, all products and applications are driving some business values. So a couple of years back when I said like it wasn't official data mesh, but we started end-to-end visibility STO, right? That touches all this vertical STOs and then aligns what data means to them. And then like as part of this decoupling, decentralization effort, we started identifying what the ontology looks like, right? So identified, okay, here are the domains, and this domain has this boundaries, and these are the data products that you should be owning and kind of supporting for cross-domain use cases as well as within intra-domain use cases. So as part of this effort, I mean, like going back to what Sebastian was saying, when you deliver the value with whatever foundation you have, it doesn't have to be perfect. You will never have self-service data platform that is 100% perfect, right? Start with what the foundation data platform you have, deliver or show the value. So I'll give you an example. When we identified certain domains for our warehouse management system and a yard management system, we identified that there were certain trailers that were left behind or unnoticed on our Canada cross-dock. And there are about like 500 to 700 trailers not knowing whose responsibility it is when the handoff happened between the two. But when we provided this visibility, we identified that, and then customers are calling lost in transit that they haven't received, but nobody knows why, right? When you kind of dig into it. We showed this value, 500 to 700 trailer per week. That is almost 26,000 to 36,000 cartons per year. $900 to $1,000 value per carton. That's like $35 million worth of value in your bottom line that you are uncovering just by providing that visibility in the domain-driven data. So that realization and that value, when you kind of show it, that goes back into serving and supporting your self-service data platform initiatives to build that foundation, to strengthen that foundation.
I think, Nachiket, that's an amazing example because it's not just in the end value in the P&L, which you see, but it's also customer value, right? And I think that's often, I feel also talking to other data professionals, is that data feels some way removed from customers and customer impact. And I think that's an excellent example where you with data have direct customer impact and just it's thousands of orders, right? Where customers need to follow up.
And it connects back to our mantra, right? Cost efficient, perfect order at scale. This was not part of your perfect order KPIs, right? Incident free. No, there are incidents. Customers reporting incidents they haven't received. But you can measure the KPIs as KPI is also a type of data product, right? You know who owns it or who should own it. If there is no visibility, you create new KPI and identify who should be owning this so that this doesn't happen in future.
Yeah. Numbers matter, man. Yeah, that's a great story. Mark?
I mean, Sebastian's kind of touched on it. I always start with business outcomes.
Yeah.
So a good data strategy is top down and bottom up. But if you don't start with understanding what the business outcomes that are fit in that strategy and base your program, that also gives you your sequence. Bottom up, you have to build a data foundation. You need governance, you need data quality, you need security, you need privacy. There's things we know we need to do, but to do those in a vacuum without, I think the way I said it when you and I talked offline, $1 of investment from the business should deliver value, measurable value. So if you don't start with outcomes, you can't get there. That's one of the biggest differences. From 10 years ago or 20 years ago, businesses might have had more patience 10 years ago or 20 years ago to build a warehouse or build a lake. Now they want value from that first dollar of investment. And I like the mesh construct because it allows me to think about how to rapidly deliver value, but also say within the strategy, I've now built connectivity to all these sources. There's some on-prem that I don't want long-term. I'll address that in my strategy. There's some in cloud that I may want to beef up or mature over time, but I can focus on delivering value with that first dollar of investment while still having a strategy to get us to an end state.
I'm going to share part of that one-to-one we had earlier. We were sitting in the back of a room in a previous session. You know, you always whisper and talk during the session sometimes. And it was a great presentation, but there was a slide that had 7 steps for a CDO, and it was walking through this long process. And Mark and I are in the back whispering. I'm like, man, that's like 1990s waterfall. And nothing against it. What I meant by that is, and sometimes you still do that, but in today's world with the agility and the speed that we have to deliver at, you can't do that. It's agile. It's starting small. It's moving fast. It's proving use cases, creating value from that first dollar so you can get the second dollar, and then doing it all over again. It's a different world now. We just can't work in that approach. And I think data mesh lends itself because you can start small, because you can focus on one domain, because you can build data products that hold value, pretty impressive numbers. On the investment side, let's come back to that piece a little bit. So when we start talking about, and Mark, I'll come back to you on investment. How do you justify that first dollar?
Depends on who I'm justifying it for. Let's talk about value just from a data perspective. Very few data organizations are good at estimating value or forecasting value. Very few businesses are. And even in the CDO role I had where I reported to the CEO, it took us several years to become accurate and surgically precise on being able to forecast value and, more importantly, be able to measure value.
We all write business cases. We rarely go back and measure them, indeed. Yeah.
I mean, I had one time where we saw significant attrition risk, and the business didn't take any action, and that customer segment, which was unknown until we built the analytics for it, left. And that taught me that we need to focus as much on the action, who owns the action, and how to measure it. But it is a journey to learn how to forecast and estimate value, because when I reported that CEO in my first ExCo meeting, we missed our quarterly numbers. And all of my peers, which were business leaders and product owners around the world, they got up and they said, okay, second quarter, here's what we're going to do to get back on revenue. My boss purposely made me the last one, and I looked up at the whiteboard, and there were all these columns, which are business functions. And I went and drew a horizontal line across all of them, and I said, well, from a P&L perspective, there's nothing I can do with data that's going to directly drive revenue growth. But here's what I'll do in each of your functions to enable you to achieve your forecast. But learning how to do that, you would think data practitioners, we would be great at it. I have found in every organization it takes time to teach and train and learn that. But I think that's the success of a CDO today, particularly in a mesh construct. And a mesh gives us tools we didn't have before to do that faster.
I like the couple times we've mentioned about the idea of reinvesting. Sebastian mentioned it as well. I know the first, I don't know if you would call it a mesh. At the time I called it a data service. It was like 2018, and I called it the IT data service. I thought I had invented something. But the idea there was I had decommissioned a number of, I call these aggregator databases, right? These environments that all they were doing was aggregating data. I decommissioned them. They were expensive. I took that money and I used it to build my data service, one kind of environment that we could manage. And then I used fact tables and a simple SharePoint site to kind of they were my early data products, if you will. But I used the money that I was using for those other systems, and I reinvested in kind of my early mesh, and it paid immediate value. Immediately. It was faster, it was easier, and then I had to figure out how to deliver the demand. I didn't have Starburst then, so I was struggling to do that. But I think that's part of it is being able to take those early savings and say, hey, hold on a second, it's proven value. I'm going to take that money and I'm going to reinvest it over here. Sometimes, depending on how you think about it, left to right, on the right side you have the business, on the left side you have IT. If you can start taking money away from those big, expensive infrastructure projects, and you start investing that more on the right side, closer to the business on the analytics projects, you're going to be able to deliver greater value, I think. Fantastic. All right, that's been really good. I think we're going to have time for questions, which is good news. Discussion's been great, real open discussion. I want to just, before we kind of get into some of the Q&A pieces, I'd like to kind of jump into, Nacho, if you don't mind starting the kind of tips, right? Just you've already shared a lot, and so I kind of feel like maybe I'm stretching for tips because you guys have already shared a lot of good ideas. Any other tips you would share for somebody just getting started with their data mesh? Any ideas, pitfalls, so to speak?
Yeah, there is no silver bullet. And this is like all the data mesh, like as Zhamak said, it's multi-quarter, if not multi-year paradigm shift, right? That involves technology and culture. In some cases, you may be starting greenfield, In our cases, we did not start greenfield. Like it was more brownfield, where we have to worry about existing data warehouses and still kind of identify the values or opportunities and kind of feed your greenfield the long-term initiative. So it has to be business driven. End to end, we were blessed and lucky that we got that executive leadership and technology leadership alignment, and we had to kind of like now work more bottom up instead of top down alignment sort of it. So that has made it much easier, and then showing this quick iterative value and picking domain by domain definitely helps. But that's what I would say. I mean, like you can start, and this whole overall organizational transformation to go towards microservices and decoupled architecture across technology, not just data, but across technology, has fueled into that overall initiative. So that's what I would say. I mean, like modernize your technology stack, right? Like make it business driven, and then go iterative approach.
How involved was your business stakeholder in that? And how important was that, and how involved were they? Because I always say it's important to get. I say if you can find a stakeholder that won't let you fail. Right? What I mean by that is there's no way you're going to fail because they're right in there with you, and they will fail with you, but you won't because they won't let you. You want that guy in the room, that person in the room.
Yeah, we're lucky in that front. Like our CEO is a great partner. This end-to-end initiative. I mean, initially it was really challenging. Like we would find good business use cases to drive this end-to-end, but maybe you don't have the technology support because they have their own domain-specific priorities and all that. And then, like when we try to go too much federated, we had like technology could send data, but we did not have the use case or the business strategy, like what it would drive. But then finally, like there were points where, okay, are we doing the right thing? Are we going in the right direction? But that initial value that we showed, as well as this constant support in the overall mission, like it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and like show the value as you are moving through it, that definitely helped.
Those lessons are so valuable. I know the stakeholder I had, she was a great partner, and whenever I thought it was going bad, I'd go in and you'd go in and say, hey, here's what's going on, and she would say, it's okay. Yeah. This is what we learned. And so sometimes when you have a leader like that is willing to kind of take the punches with you, so to speak, it's fantastic. Mark, some question for you. Any tips, ideas for the audience?
Well, I think number one, let's recognize with a mesh, with components like Fabric, that we live in a world today that is a convergence of a lot of fast-moving technologies: big data, AI, cloud and cloud native,
quantum computing,
IoT, quantum compute, and there's one I'm missing in there, digital. This is a convergence of a lot of technology capabilities we didn't have 10 years ago. So don't be afraid to think differently and think outside the box. You know, Michael Stonebreaker at his presentation yesterday said, don't lift and shift to cloud. And I've seen a lot of companies do that, and then you basically have the same challenges on cloud you had before. So don't be afraid of changing, but understand how these technologies come together and you can change, because that to me would be a success factor of a mesh strategy. And alone right there.
Perfect. I was one of those in 2016 that I was leading cloud migration, and I tried the lift and shift. After year one, we tried to count the savings, and it wasn't what we thought it was. We very quickly twisted to a different approach, which was refactoring and being more selective. Yeah, so.
Yeah. It's funny, when I was at HSBC, I said the biggest data accomplishment we delivered, and I called it at the time the biggest data accomplishment in a 155-year-old bank, was getting them on the public cloud in early 2017. And we had one business outcome forecasted for 3 countries. I asked for X amount of investment, and I guaranteed X amount of revenue growth in 90 days. We actually underspent because AWS was really generous with their time in helping us do the work. The work only took 3 days. It took 90 days to do the project, 3 days of roll work. And in the first 90 days, we generated at least 25% more growth off that. But that was year 3 of a program thinking about business outcomes, how to measure those business outcomes.
You bring up a good point. I'll just interject one other idea there on cloud migrations, because sometimes we think about, and I should be careful when I start up by saying you don't have to migrate. What I mean by that is you can make better decisions about what you migrate, right? So in any organization, you look across all your data sources, it makes a lot of sense to go to a cloud, right? You've got an Amazon partner in the room here. It makes a lot of sense to go to Amazon. And so the challenge here is that as an architect or as a CDO, you don't want to be forced, right? You don't want to sit there and say, I have to do it. I've got to figure out a way to make this budget last across all these problems. And when you can sit back and be more selective and say, you know what, I can leave that data where it is right now, and I can try to fix this, or I'm going to prioritize which data sets need to go and which data sets can stay. And sometimes with a mesh, you decide to leave some data on premise, and you buy yourself time. And you mesh with the on-premise systems, with your cloud systems, and then when it's time to move it, you move it, and there's no disruption to your business because they never even know it moved. And so again, it's about optionality, and it's about giving yourself the opportunity to have more decisions, so to speak, more trade-offs, more considerations when trying to figure out what the right thing to do is.
Well, that flexibility and agility you just described, that's in the CDO's toolkit today, and to me, that's one of the big changes. We didn't have that 10 years ago in our toolkit, but that agility of a strategy and enabling a business is
Agile
tremendous.
delivery's changed everything, indeed. Yeah, we think data mesh is changing everything, Agile. Sebastian, any?
Yeah, a lot of things were said. Let me add one thing is from a governance perspective. I think you can keep it very simple, lean in the beginning. The only thing you need is you need a domain map and a domain model for your data domains that delineates like a city map, right? The different quarters and with the roads that say, hey, this is the one side of the road, this is the other side. So I think this is important because in a federated government you need that clarity to know who is responsible for what kind. And it's not a really complex thing. You can do it in a workshop. It takes a couple days, weeks, and you have a first version, and then you iterate on it. I think this is one thing that you really have to have before. And then I think the other thing, just thinking back about our journey now, the key unlock again for Vista was the organizational aspect. Being able to see, hey, there's a business case for data, right? As you talked about it. Hey, we ramp up, we spin up a cross-functional data product team, a pizza team, 2 pizza team in the Amazon lingo, right? Yeah, and we hire these people or we prioritize their work, and they can start building a data product in a week, or start building it in a week, and then what we're trying to push there is this MLP thinking, right? Building at least a minimum lovable product, not a viable product, because I've seen many companies with many viable products.
I'm so going to steal that. I'm so going to steal that a lot.
We try to make them lovable at least, and then measure the impact, and then once they're out after 3 months and lovable, right, you iterate on them and scale the value, and I think that would be my 2 cents on that, how to get started.
Perfect. Before we jump into the question, please, just give me 1 second. We'll close and I'm going to jump right. Or did you have a question for Sebastian? Okay, awesome. Fantastic. So just to add on that piece there, I just kind of just sharing my thoughts. There's a couple of moments kind of in a data mesh journey that you remember, right? To me, the moment when people realize that you can actually connect to a system. And for us, it's Trino. There's other ways to do it. I like Trino, obviously. So for Starburst, when you sit with a customer and they realize that you can connect to these sources very easily, that's a great moment because then it shifts their thinking. The second moment, I think, is when you sit with a domain team and they're part of the design process. I used to say this, and I used to upset my IT colleagues. I'm in IT, obviously. I was in IT for a long time, but I would say I get the IT guys out of the room and I bring my business teams into the room. And then we sit down and design a domain. What I mean by that, and that's not really the way it happens because you have IT and business working together, but it's business driven. And when your business is in the room telling you how they use data, what data they need, and then you start to very quickly kind of generate that for them, that's a powerful moment, right? For the consumer, I remember going to a business team with a big enterprise data architecture model, saying, "Isn't this beautiful?" They're saying, "What?" It didn't make any sense to them, right? It was architecture. But when you start to design for them, it's great. The third moment I would say is when you start working on data products. Everything we're doing is about data products. I like it when you build a data product, and there's no such thing as a perfect data product. But when you build a data product and you take it to the business or to take it to your consumer, and you say, "Is that what you asked for?" I guarantee you they're going to say, "Nope, that's not what I asked for. You got the wrong location field," and you fix it for them right there. Is that the one you wanted? That's when they sit back and say, "Whoa, this is different. I thought you were going to go back, kick off a project, change a data model somewhere, and then bring it back, fix it right in front of you." Now, it's not always that easy. I'm simplifying it, but in some cases, when the data is already part of the domain, when it's already in the domain, it is actually that easy, right? And so those are moments, I think, shifts when you start to kind of change the culture. People realize, yeah, this is different. So please, sir, your question.
Thank you very much for the Thank you very much for the very interesting conversation. You mentioned multiple times the concept of data product, but you've been also mentioning data product as a joint table, as a KPI, as a recommendation engine, as a business application. So what
what would you really, and then you mentioned it's 120, so it cannot be everything. So what would you consider a data product? Because if everything is a data product, nothing is a data product.
Yeah.
And so you cannot maintain, curate, so the entire concept is diluted. So what would be your data product definition?
So please go ahead, Sebastian.
So we define it indeed a bit broader because we said it is an artifact that solves a business problem with data and analytics. And it needs to have at least a minimum level of complexity. Yeah? It needs to then have certain levels of quality attached to it. Yeah? And we actually defined a data product lifecycle management cookbook, yeah, with different, it has also lifecycle stages, yeah, where you can say, hey, it starts with a concept, goes to a proof of concept, minimum level per concept. And the form and shape can be really different. We wanted to keep it intentionally that open because there are different business problems you solve with different things. Therefore, we just don't want to say it's just an API or it's just a table or it has to always have some kind of an interface. Therefore, it's broader because business problems are different.
I don't want to monopolize it. That is where the entire concept gets vague because the more complex is the application, it's like a normal product because all the products are data-driven, right? So then every product is a data product, and any business application, an ERP system is a data product. On the other side is example of, okay, I fix it in 2 seconds. It doesn't fit for a complex data product. It's not true. So it works for a very basic set of data components. So what I'm confused about the entire story is not the logic and so on, is what exactly you mean with that? Because if you're trying to boil the ocean from the super big and the super small, then it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I think, well, just real quick, I think they're at the end of the day, when you ask your consumer or the beholder, if you will, how they value or how they use data product, you might get different answers. From a framework perspective, the way that, and I think you're right, you're hitting on something is that I think we should all start to agree on a standard structure and a standard framework for all data products so that we know what they are. Yes, they'll be used differently. Yes, some are big, some are small. Yes, some get refreshed every second, some get refreshed much longer. But let's start with the basics, right? At a minimum, when you think about a data product, you think about an aggregated data set, right? So somebody would say it could be a table, it could be, but for the most part, most data products are an aggregated data set. You're bringing data from different sources together into an aggregated result. Number one. Number two, and this is the most important part, that data product has metadata attached to it. It's not a data product if it's just data. It's a data product when you start to actually have a description. This is what its purpose is. This is how it's used. This is who owns it. This is the quality of the data product. This is who's been using it. So in our product, and I think hopefully most people are following the book, if you will, that's a standard data product. That's the way you want it to work. Now, we're not all there yet, right? We're not all perfect there yet. Some of us are just getting started with our data mesh journey, so it might look a little bit different, but that's I think, a standard framework we can all work with and start with. Now, in some cases, that aggregated data set is huge, a lot of data. In some cases, you've got 10 people sharing that data product, so you have to have a lot of governance and versioning. In some cases, that data product is changing all the time because it's part of an ideation team or a discovery team that's just inventing, so to speak. So how you use a data product, I think, varies quite a bit. But I do think, to your point, I think it's good for us to have a standard. Let me go to this question here before we run out of time.
Interested to learn more about the team structure. So what are the new types of roles that you're seeing and how is that evolving?
Good question.
Yeah, I can start on that. We have 26 of these teams, so each team starts with a data product manager, which is like a product manager we see from software development. And that is a big learning. It's not easy to find them. As we started 3 years ago, right, there was not a unique definition of what a data product manager is. There were product managers from software, but not for data. So we moved analysts in that role. We tried moving product managers from software development in the role, but also domain experts who know that domain really well. I think each has a pro and con. But that's product management. Then we have data analysis, data analysts, data product analysts on these teams who build mainly visualizations, for example. Then you have data engineers, and we have data scientists for the teams where you need them. You don't always have each and every role on each and every team, but you always have a data product manager because that person needs to understand what's the problem we solve with that, and then build the right product to solve the problem.
Great. I mean, I would agree. I mean, the product management role is emerging, it's evolving. We're trying to figure it out. I mean, the question I was asking my last organization, using your definition, I'm almost spot on, was what's the career path to that? Do I start with a data analyst and evolve their career? I actually have found some of my portfolio people were the most skilled because they had done a number of other data roles before they went into portfolio management. But it is something we're all learning in terms of the talent profile for it, the talent development for that role.
It's what you want is you want a product manager that is business intimate, but is technical enough to drive the development, if you will. That's a hard role, but if you can find them, and what you end up doing is finding the closest thing to it and then training them up to fit that mold. I would also add that it's easier to train a business person how to use IT than it is to train an IT person to learn the business. So, can I just say a thank you? I know we're out of time.
Yeah.
Nachikit, Mark, Sebastian, thank you so much. I'm going to go back and listen to it.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.